To maximise the fuel economy from your car, you may think you need to be the exact opposite of how to drive a race car, but actually the answer is to take the style of driving and flip it on its head. The paradox of racing cars is that the less fuel they use, the lighter they can be, and thus the faster they go. So racing drivers may look fast, but actually they're just incredibly efficient. We'll explain with a simple example. One of the most important rules in racing is understanding energy. You want to retain the maximum amount of speed every time you accelerate at a corner to pass through as quickly as possible while losing the least amount of energy. When you drive your car and you want to save the maximum amount of fuel, you can apply the same ideology, only you aren't doing it to achieve the highest speed, but to get the furthest distance using the least amount of energy. This is why a race car driver learns a track, so they can learn where to slow down and where to speed up without having to disturb either action. If you accelerate in your car, then brake, then accelerate again, you just wasted energy, and your tank of fuel won't last as long. We've broken this down into some simple pointers. Lots of these are used by racing drivers, so the next time you fill up your tank and someone says, "Hey, you got really good mileage to your last tank of fuel," you can look at them, smile and say, "That's because I drive like a race car driver." First, remove weight. There is a reason why you don't see Formula 1 cars with a passenger seat, or any seat at all for that matter. Remove anything in your car that you don't regularly use, but leave the things you legally have to have, like a spare wheel. If you have never taken anyone out in the back seat of your car, you could remove them. And have you ever thought of the weight of the carpet in the boot? Not only that, fuel is heavy, so if you aren't doing long journeys, why not fill up half a tank instead of the whole thing? Race cars end the race on fumes because carrying extra fuel will slow them down. Coasting gear not in neutral. A modern engine can spin without injecting in fuel using the rotation of the wheels. It's actually the opposite of its design, but it still works well. When a car burns fuel, it injects it with air and forces it to explode, pushing the piston down, forcing the connecting rod to move, which spins the crankshaft and finally spins the gearbox, which feeds the motion to the wheels via a drive shaft. When you coast in gear, the opposite happens and the wheels spin, which in turn spins the drive shaft, then the gearbox, then the crank, which then moves the piston without the need for an explosion. So no fuel is needed to be detonated. This can give you a few yards or meters free, and when you add that up over a journey or a few miles, you've probably got 5 to 10% of your journey free. A win-win. Race car drivers do this, called lift and coast, to conserve fuel and control brake temperature, as well as to maximise the amount of energy used and created over each lap. Targeting a rev range. Whereas Formula 1 drivers aim to shift at over 10,000 RPM every time, your target can be much lower. Shifting at 2,000 RPM is ideal to maximise efficiently. Shift before then and you'll likely have very little momentum, but shift after and you'll burn extra fuel. It's not as fun as revving the car to the max like a racing driver, but it is a challenge nonetheless. Doing this all the time may not be great for your engine, as it does need to spin at higher speeds occasionally. Our advice is to abide by the 2000 RPM rule 80% of the time. That way you avoid any expensive mechanical bills that outweigh any fuel saved. Look out! Reading the road ahead doesn't just help you save fuel, but it makes you a safer driver. Ask any racing driver how far ahead they are thinking and looking, and they will tell you as far as possible, as they will be there soon. And if your opponents crash ahead of you, you want to be able to react, avoid the crash, and win the race. On the road, you want to react in advance to other drivers, to smooth every action and carry the most amount of kinetic energy you can, and by giving yourself longer to react, you can maximise the time spent coasting and avoid other drivers that may be driving erratically. It isn't just slow and steady wins the race, but fast and safe will get you home. If you really want to increase your fuel economy to the maximum, then plan your route in advance before going anywhere. Racing drivers know the track like the back of their hand before they even arrive. Avoid high traffic areas and hills wherever possible. If you have to drive in a hilly area, remember, accelerate towards them, hold speed up them, and then coast. This maximises the mileage you get and the fuel you burn. Service your car routinely and check your tyres regularly. Fresh motor oil will offer the best lubrication to your engine. This reduces friction, which reduces the effort needed to spin everything. Race cars wouldn't start a race without having a full checkup and refresh of fluids, so keeping on top of your car is vital to save at the pumps. But let's not forget tyres. These are the only contact you have with the road. So the more effort it takes for them to grip, and the more drag they cause, the worse the fuel economy you will get. Saving money to buy cheaper tyres can sound good, but if they achieve worse fuel efficiency, you'll always be paying more than you should for every mile you drive. How many race cars have you seen with air conditioning? Yeah, they don't use it. Why? Because the air conditioning system is parasitic to an engine. It forces the engine to work harder, meaning lower fuel efficiency. We know sometimes on a very hot day that you'll need it, but make sure that you limit its use. The majority of drivers leave the system on even when it's fairly cool outside. If you don't need it, turn it off. If you've ever watched a race, you'll know that they're smooth out of every corner. On the road, you can't just cut across the lane to save fuel, but you can drive the shortest distance within the lane by going to the edges where it's safe to do so. But don't cross the line. This might seem like a pointless exercise, but think of it this way. If you made every corner you drive 10 inches shorter, and you turned 100 times, that's 83 feet less that you've travelled. So that last bit of your drive is for free. Avoid driving too slowly. When we think of saving fuel, we think of driving slow. But to save fuel, you need to be relaxed. If you ask a racing driver when they put their best lap in and with the least mistakes, they'll tell you it's the one where everything felt right. So they are driving with less stress. As we stress, our decision making is impaired and we make mistakes. If you drive slowly and other cars are always pressurising you to speed up, your stress levels will go up and you will likely not drive optimally to save fuel, and you may be forced to speed up. Aim for 10% under the limit. This will save you a little bit of fuel, but it isn't so slow that the majority of other drivers will get annoyed with you. Ever heard of a racing driver talk about aerodynamics, or a race engineer discuss drag? These fill both the engineer and the driver's heads all through a race weekend. Race cars need to be as aero efficient as possible for speed, but they also need some drag to keep them stuck to the road. Drafting is a race technique to drive in the clean air behind another vehicle. Imagine that your car is always having to make an invisible hole in the air. If you're driving behind someone, your car doesn't have to work as hard because the other car is punching that hole in the air ahead of you. Some top speed runs actually get a car to run ahead of them to punch a hole in the air to help them go faster. To use this method to save fuel, look for larger vehicles than yours when driving at higher speeds. And if you're happy with the speed they're going, then follow them. Now you aren't the one punching the hole in the air, and your engine has a slightly easier job, meaning it needs less fuel. A rollout is a term that is used to describe an acceleration number based on the wheels being in motion and not stationary at the beginning. If you've heard of Teslas going from 0 to 60 miles an hour in under 2 seconds, or various other manufacturers claiming similar times, you'll probably notice the asterisk, and under that it will say minus rollout. The reason they do this is that making dead weight of a car move uses significant energy. 0 to 5 miles an hour is very testing on a car. Once it overcomes the inertia, the weight is already in motion, and so it's easier to make it go. This is why classic cars are rarely ever accelerated from a stop. It would be very wearing on the parts, and so instead they roll out to a nominal speed, say 10 miles an hour, and then accelerate. How can this help you save fuel? Well, instead of accelerating from a dead stop every time, get some motion first. It should only take a second or two, but can really help cut your fuel bill. In a manual transmission, you have control of this by raising the clutch to the biting point and letting it cause the wheels to spin before accelerating. Automatics usually roll as soon as you lift off the brake pedal, so it's even simpler. Remember, moving a dead weight is very testing on a car, so you won't only save fuel, but your clutch, gearbox and engine all have a slightly easier life, meaning they're a bit less likely to throw up an expensive bill. We all like listening to our favourite music when in the car, but it may be costing you money. Rally drivers, track drivers and drag racers may all disagree on the most fun way to compete in motorsport, but ask them how many of them are listening to music and you'll get the same answer. This doesn't mean that you have to drive in silence, but instead listen to relaxing music or talk radio. Studies have found that the more aggressive or faster tempo music we listen to in the car, the faster we drive, and that isn't good for saving fuel. Lastly, parking. If you watch a Formula 1 race, you'll notice the fastest cars have the garages closest to the entrance of the pits. The winner of the year before gets to choose first, and they always pick for the first garage. When you go out and get to where you're going and need to park, pick the first space you see. You'll likely walk past people who are trying to park as close to the door as possible, wasting fuel in the meantime, crawling along, attempting to squeeze into a space. A little walk is both good for you and it will save you a few pennies every time you park. It might not sound like much, but it adds up quickly. As the old saying goes, if you take care of the pennies, they will take care of the pounds. We hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have any tips of saving fuel, then please leave them in the comments below. If you want more from the Miles Driven, check out our other videos or our podcast. Just search the Miles Driven wherever you get your podcast. Hey, we're great for a relaxing drive in the car, which might help you save a bit of fuel. For more, subscribe, and if you enjoyed this, we really appreciate every like our videos get, as it helps us build the channel and bring out more content. For now though, adios, we'll see you in the next one.